Formerly Plantation Orange Nassau, Buxton on the east coast of Demerara, located approximately 9 miles from the capital Georgetown, was bought for $50,000 by ex-slaves in 1840. The community got its name from the British abolitionist Sir Thomas Buxton, who fought for the abolition of slavery. Its sister village, Friendship, formerly Plantation Friendship, was purchased in 1841 for $80,000, and together these two villages were joined, forming Buxton Friendship, whose inhabitants call it just Buxton. This move represented victory for Buxton post-emancipation. During that time, one of the first things that the slaves did was to make lands available for the construction of schools and churches, land for housing and farming, drainage and other infrastructure. Community leader Fitzroy Young explains.
The history of Buxton should start with the purchase of Victoria, which is the very first village that the ex-slaves bought. Buxton was bought in 1840, and right after then, the former slaves purchased Friendship in 1841, and shortly after that, the two villages were amalgamated or joined together to become the largest village in the country. I think it's the same up to today. So Buxton has always been regarded as the premier village of Guyana. One of the first things that the former slaves did was to provide land for church, because according to Guyana, they wanted to thank God for making them free. And so lands were allocated for church and school. School is because I don't think either one of them could have written or signed their names on the thing. So they wanted to ensure that that doesn't happen again. I'm not sure if it's not happening today, but they wanted to ensure that their descendants have access to schools.
The ex-slaves also provided large farmlands, lands for farming cash crops. Dr. David Hinds, an associate professor, a Buxtonian and village leader, says that after the period of struggle, that villagers managed to create their own government by establishing a village council to manage the community affairs.
They created an economy because once they distributed the house lots at the front of the village, they distributed plots at the back of the village, what we call the back dam. And those plots became productive plots where they would plant cash crops and sell in the open market. They also got into, very early, they got into cane farming, which is planting cane in the village at the back there and selling to the estate. So they created an economy. And the next thing they did was to create their own government, what we call today the village council. That is, how will they govern themselves? Representative government. So along with the church, and the school, the economy, the government, in effect what they were doing in Buxton here and the rest of Guyana, they were really creating civilization. And we want to make that point very strongly because the coast was an uncivilized space. It was a place where you bought people, sold people, killed people, dehumanized people. So when these people got together here in Buxton Friendship and they bought land and turned those lands into productive spaces, space where they govern, they were really creating civilization. So we here in Buxton take that extremely seriously, our contribution to human civilization.
Even after the village gained its freedom, the struggle continues, since the slaves who worked on the plantation removed from that system of slavery, and the colonial masters now had to pay for laborers. In 1856, the British Guyana legislature gave the government the right to enact improvement taxes on the properties of the villagers. This led to a standoff between the government and the purchasers of Buxton. Community leader and educator Deon Abrams explains.
When the slaves were emancipated, it created a problem for the plantation economy in terms of labor, because labor was no longer free and so on. And many of the slaves who were on the plantations, when they bought the villages, the planters saw that as a movement away, a labor moving from the estates to the new villages, and they saw that as a loss to themselves. So it was establishing dependence if the villages were not economically viable, their alternative would have been returning to the estates to work. So that flooding of their farmlands and all of that was all part of a strategy to keep the villagers under subjugation, to make them return to the estates. Because, I mean, the idea was, the feeling was that the movement away from the estate was a rejection of that system, all right, not wanting to go back there after the experiences that they would have had. And they needed to keep them under that suppression. The villagers believed that these lands were bought and paid for by them, and therefore things like taxes and so on, they were not supposed to pay. There is a famous story of James Jupiter and 3 other members of Friendship who, when they were asked to pay taxes, decided that they were not going to pay. And when the administration decided to seize their properties, they decided that they were going to take a schooner and go all the way to England to the governor to make representation to get back there. In fact, the report states that when they came to evict them, that one of them barred himself in the house and they could not remove him pretty easily. But they took a boat and they went to, and they said they were going to England to make representation on this whole issue of paying taxes and so on. They got as far as Barbados, and the governor of Barbados, they had an audience with him, and he gave them a sealed envelope that they didn't open. He told them to take it back to the governor here. But it was a trick, because in that envelope, what it said was exempt these 3 villagers from paying taxes. Right? So when they came back and the governor declared that these 3 men will not pay taxes, the villagers were, they went to represent themselves. So there became enmity between these 3 representatives and the people of Buxton itself. So the village movement was a struggle for village administration. If you trace the history, there were various issues relating Pleasance, or the issue of drainage and irrigation, the installation of the pumps and all of these things. It was a history where the people felt that they had a right to govern themselves, they had a right to dictate whether they pay taxes and so on, but really it was a burden to maintain. Even though they built and dug all these canals and so, after a while they found that they could not by themselves maintain all of these things. So the amalgamation came after a series. What you call amalgamation is that each village had its own council, right? But then you had the amalgamation where they twin villages. They call them sister villages, like Buxton Friendship, BV Triumph, and so on. Pleasance, Sparindam. So when you talk about Buxton, Buxton refers to Buxton Friendship.
Further, in another effort to settle this dispute, some villagers led by the women decided to block the train carrying the governor and force him to listen to their grievances. With his train surrounded by angry villagers, the governor promised that Buxton would be exempted from those taxes. Against all those odds, the villagers still managed to build an economy. In fact, small businesses became part of the character of the village. Several cake shops, grocery stores, and even bakeries and coconut factories, and a mattress factory were established.
Where the train station used to be, and there was a little strip of street there. And on that street alone, you had a tailor shop, haberdashery shop, a Mahabi shop, a clothing store, a rum shop. Even later on, there was a bookstore there. There was a laundromat, what we would call a laundry, right? The dry cleaners. You had a dispensary. You had everything there. What we now call in modern language a mall. That was like a little strip mall there. And so in the village, they created these things. And that is very important, because often we think that African Guyanese have not participated and have never been entrepreneurs. And we want to hammer home that entrepreneurship was very much part of the strategy of development in the village, small businesses.
Community leader Linden Franz explained that the Africans, especially those in Buxton, have contributed significantly to business development in Guyana.
We had all these baker shops at one time. Some people are saying 11, but I know we had 7 in the village. But we don't own a major bakery selling bread throughout the country and exporting other things we produce. That's a question we need to answer as we ponder the future of a community such as Buxton Friendship. Well, the cassava mill had to go with the farming, okay? But I once again want to apologize and say, please bear with us, but that's how we have to put the bits and pieces together, right? But we need to answer that question as to how we take the industries. Oh, one of the other thing, like when you refer to the gold fields, I can give you a part of Buxton history where 7 brothers drowned one time. The falls was named Mora Falls. They named the rest of the family in village, the nephew that was left, they called him Mora, because he lost his uncles and his father at Mora Falls, right? But that was in the days when people were living here in groups and paddling past the falls. Today we have big outboard motors pushing you up those rapids, right? And that's how you got going to history and culture again. One man in the captain wake, Captain wakey wakey boatman, boatman wakey wakey bowman, bowman wake with the paddle in the hand. All I want is a long and strong on too much of me, long and strong etana me, oh. Right, because now they are going to attempt to cross the Etanami waterfall by paddling.
In 1938, a monument was erected on the 100th anniversary of the abolition of slavery to separate the farmlands from the housing areas. During that same period, the railway embankment was established, and Franz tells us how Buxton would have benefited from this improvement.
In the 1930s, because of the kind of production you had, farm production from Buxton, at that time the railway was established. They made a ruling that the transport and harbors had to leave every Friday night 2 goods carriages on the side end at Buxton, so that farmers could put their produce, and it had to be taken by the 4th train in the morning to Georgetown. That was why that part of the premier village history, the kind of production that Georgetown depended on us supplying them. They were saying the kind of respect even the train paid to Buxton. In those days, the train walked with steam, and as it lets out the steam, it goes chooks, 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 chooks. So they say when the train leaves Georgetown, it used to chook, 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 chook. It's saying Bakra Beta, Bakra Beta, Bakra Beta, Bakra Beta. They were saying the Bakra. This is a name given to white people because of what the sun did to their back. It used to get red and look raw. They call them Bakra, or better than us. But because of the respect the train had for Buxton, when it started coming around sideline, it used to change and say, Buxton Trash House, Buxton Trash House, Buxton Trash House, Buxton Trash House.
Today, this community is known as one of the most established African settlements on the east coast of Demerara, with a population of 8,000 persons. Buxton sits on very fertile land which is surrounded by an irrigation system, including the well-known Company Canal. Local farmers produce a variety of vegetables and fruits, including Buxton Spice Mango. This mango is unique to Buxton, being fleshy and sweet like others, but having a unique spicy taste. Buxton is characterized by its churches, 2 primary and nursery schools, a health center, a secondary school, a practical instruction center, a water distribution system, among other amenities. This community also has an established bakery and a service station, which is being transformed into a mini mall. There is also the famous Tipperary Hall, which is used for community activities. But while these entire infrastructures are in place, the education system within the community had deteriorated over the last 2 decades. Community leader and educator Deon Abrams explains.
The village has grown, And with the increase in population, the kind of connection, the number of people that there are now, I think is one of the problems in terms of that bond that would have been there, the close connection. And with that increasing population, a lot of the values that we would have had, those would have been lost. The whole idea of every man is brother's keeper, right? Because if you ask now, in the old days, everybody knew everybody. But now if you can ask for some people from the back and you ask a man at the front, they don't know who the person is, all right? So one of the problems is the downfall, the explosion of the community. But apart from that, education has taken a beating. With the collapse in education, and then the problem of the people's economy, where people found it when Guyana was going through a tough time period in the 70s and 80s. A lot of our children fell out of school. A lot of our teachers were retrenched. And the school became dysfunctional in a sense because children went to school, they weren't teachers. I wrote CXC and GC and basically had to do it on my own. And that is when the lessons phenomena came into being because the schools were not providing the kind of education that it used to. And teachers went outside the system, established these afternoon classes, and it's something that they're talking about getting rid of now, but it's so entrenched that you really can't get rid of it. So the educational collapse, the system itself, is responsible for many of the young people here who are really not equipped to write and to read as the older people who went up to 6th standard in those years.
Many also know of Buxton as a haven for the criminals who escaped Camp Street Prison in 2002, which caused activities in the community to cease by 4 p.m. under the state-imposed curfew. The community also moved from 2 high schools to 0, from 4 primary schools to 2. All of these negatively impacted the collapse in the education system within the community. Today, things in the village are vastly different. On any given afternoon, the community is mostly quiet. Men and women on bicycles or on foot are returning home from work and guiding their livestock from the open pastures on which they have spent the day grazing. The village leaders believe that the establishment of a village policy and literacy program by the government can improve the many challenges faced by the community today.
You don't move from that to where you are now and expect the village to be same. The second thing is that public policy. There was less investment in villages. The governments were no longer investing in villages. In fact, the government moved away by policy, by constitutional diktat. They moved away from the village council to the neighborhood council. So there was no longer an emphasis on the identity of the village. No, your assets in your village were now owned by people from outside of the village. And that really had a tremendous negative effect on our village because we prided ourselves on our identity and our ability to govern ourselves. I think the government can first and foremost initiate a new education approach. We have to come back to a kind of community-based education. And we have to look at the curriculum. What you teach these children. We have to include in the curriculum patriotism. When we were children, we learned about the history of Buxton right there in primary school. Right there in this primary school. Linden was reminding me that we learned about Martin Carter in 2nd standard in Brother and Kofi class. We learned the Buxton anthem or the Buxton battle song. So there was the education to count and read and write, but there was also a civic education, a village education. So we need to go back there and make education holistic so that we are not producing just children who know to read and write and pass 15 and 16 subjects, or those who pass no subject, but we create rounded people. So there has to be an investment in education that is partly grounded in the community. The other thing that the Ministry of Education has to do is to look at the question of literacy. You mentioned it. right? We are not going to solve the problem of education in this country if we don't solve the problem of literacy. And literacy is a real thing in Buxton. It's a real thing in most poor communities. And we have to deal with that as a standalone thing. What we need is to train in this country hundreds of literacy teachers. We have teachers, but not every teacher can teach literacy. So we need to train a literacy brigade. What we need is a literacy brigade, and let loose that brigade in these villages, because you're not going to get a person who can read and write to come and sit down with other people in a school hall. We may have to go to their bottom houses and teach them individually and so forth to deal with the question of literacy. So the government has to invest in education. And the other thing I think the government has to do is to invest in the people in the village economically.
The Buxton community has significantly contributed to the preservation of the African culture in Guyana. Each year, this community organizes a week of activities to celebrate Emancipation Day on August 1. Community leader Yvette Herod explains.
Buxton has been very strong in its culture. I can recall from a child where we celebrated Ghana Day, and still celebrate it. The 1st of August movement, which is an organization that was founded in 1969, continues to do African culture. We have programs which I think were you would find in the newspaper. We had symposium recently. Last night, the night before, we showed a film.
Every night of the 31st of July, there is a cultural presentation in the community where the residents participate in drumming, the singing of folk songs, elders and youth engagement. On August 1, there is a feeding program for the elderly where the young people will take a variety of traditional foods including konki, cook-up, metem and mobi to their homes, and the Buxton 1st of August movement has been playing a major role in these activities. Community leader Yvette Herod explains.
If you come on the 1st, you will be able to get your cook-up rice, your metaji, things like that. And that is done on the 1st with our drummings and so on. I want to talk about culturally, the Tukantu Multipurpose Club is an organization which was founded years ago, 1996, celebrating its 20th anniversary. The Tukantu becomes the youth arm of the 1st of August movement during these times and work along with the older folks. And they are the ones, along with other young people from the 1st of August movement, who would go around and have attend to our older folks. That organization as a youth center that it's trying to establish down there, and we really need help to get it completed. So I'm asking if there's any body, any organization, the government, to assist us, because the building is at the front there, it's at a standstill. The club functions every week for years, every week, and it also has programs. It has been doing all kinds of things, liaisoning with Ministry of Culture, Ministry of Education, Ministry of to run off its program.
As part of their cultural practices, the community continues to have their kwekwe on the eve of weddings and continues to teach the young people folk songs.
A lot of it has been preserved. A lot of it has been preserved by Buxton and has been exported. Because I could remember we, along with David Hinds that left here earlier, had a group that went around to different villages to play at the kwekwe. And I remember we go into one village, and as we going in the yard, the man for the house came out and said, "Not in his yard, not Obi and this and that," because he just couldn't understand it, right? So we experienced some of that. In the more modern times, we experience where we go to a place and people quarreling for the stereo to play because they have not been in touch with their culture. They don't understand. But then when the kwekwe start and the real nice things start by them, they start drum and dance and everything. So yes, in terms of preservation, the culture has been preserved. Buxton has contributed in a big way to that preservation, and we are still doing everything possible to keep it alive.
Buxton also has a very vibrant steel band group known as the Buxton Pride Steel Pan Orchestra. This group has won several national steel band competitions and usually participates in national events. While some of the African culture is being lost, the Buxton Friendship Community continues to maintain the tradition and also teach the youths about the rich African cultural tapestry.
Small days was a good time. My neighbors and with the children. When they singing and dancing, really admire them. What they singing? Children, children, where you been to? What she gives you? Where is mine? How can I get it? Who's they fall? Bad picnic, me not care, wicked picnic. Oh, small days are still on my mind. Small days was a good time. My neighbors and with the children. When they sing and dancing, really admire them. The colored girl in the ring. Tra la 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 la. There's a colored girl in the ring. Tra la 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 la. Colored girl in the ring. Tra la 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 la. For she